everyone. Welcome back to another Canada Immigration Live Q&A. I'm here with my faithful co-pilot, Alicia Backman-Bahari. How you doing, Alicia?
I'm good, Mark. It's been kind of like the 180 in terms of the world right now of weather-wise, at least. We went from like -30 to like +10. So it was, and it all happened in a few hours. It was like opening up the door and it was just magic when it was +10 outside. So it feels finally like maybe spring will not be that far away, but I'm sure we'll get more snow. But it just makes such a difference to have some light and some warmth again.
Absolutely. I know I just checked the forecast here and it's supposed to get up to 12 degrees Celsius today. So it's a catch-22 when we're taking little Simba out for a walk, because when it's cold, it's freezing and his little paws freeze. And so we can only go so far. And then once it warms up, it's a mud bath. And he just gets filthy. And we end up having to give him a bath every time we bring him back in. And so it's a catch-22, but if it stays warm, and we have a horrible wind that just blows through here. I don't know if you guys get the kind of wind up there, but in Lethbridge, the wind comes, which is in this case not a curse because it dries everything out. So it's warm, dry, and perfect weather for taking your dog for a walk. So that's the current weather forecast here in Alberta. And wow, there's no shortage of change once again in our lovely world of Canada immigration, Alicia. And, as we've watched big draws happening and draws that are, I'll be honest, are starting to drive me a little bonkers. A little frustrated is, I guess, the way I could say it. And if you guys are following this, and I don't know if you're in a hole maybe somewhere, maybe you are, but you can see here, French language proficiency on February the 19th, they did a draw that included 6,500 people, which dropped the CRS score down to 428, which, Alicia, I've got a number of clients that went and studied French and put the time in that now have their opportunity. I've got clients outside of Canada now, Alicia, that were able to get drawn, which is so uncharacteristic given the emphasis of our government on transitioning people within Canada. And I don't know. Can you explain this to me? Maybe our viewers have thoughts on this too, but I don't get it. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, so explaining it, well, there is legislation in place to try to promote Francophone communities and identity across Canada and especially outside of Quebec. And so that is the justification for it, is that they have obligations to try to promote Francophone communities across Canada outside of the province of Quebec. And that's why they're doing it. But you are absolutely right, Mark, where the emphasis was about 40% of our draws should be targeting people who have in Canada experience. And the problem with giving French so much artificial uplift in terms of the CRS score value is that it means that a lot of people who are not in Canada are getting those French language proficiency draws because they're qualifying under a straight federal skilled worker. They're hitting that 67 pass point, and then they also have enough in terms of their comprehensive ranking score to hit a 428, even if they have no Canadian work experience. And so this is the downside of doing such a huge draw, because 6,500, like, we can look through those previous draws and invitations issued so far, and this is, way over what they did for their CEC draw, which was 4,000. So it is a little bit frustrating, I think, for people who have been in Canada for a number of years and who are looking at these CRS points, and they're so, so high. And when you have a French draw and it's such a big French draw, the CRS score goes down, but it means that you're pulling from people outside of Canada, which
Right.
I guess if you're outside of Canada, it's something
It's
to
good for
celebrate.
you. Yeah, it's good for you. Yeah. And we know that within the provincial nominees that there are going to be, I guess, almost a little bit more than 50% fewer. There's going to be half approximately the nominations available to the provinces. And for many people within our Time's Up series, that fit within that world, and I'm referring to our podcast series, which I'd encourage you to slide over and subscribe to the Canadian Immigration Podcast. You can also watch it, obviously, the videos here on the YouTube channel. But it's so interesting to see just the impact of a large draw like this and what it does on all the other rounds. So if you look at the 4,000, there was one in January 23rd, and then a little over a week later, they did another 4,000, and it took it from 527 to 521. And there is a lot of people, Alicia, between the 500 to 521 range. Government doesn't break it down, so we don't know exactly what that split is between 500 to 509, 510 to 14, whatever it is. We don't know exactly what that breakdown is, but I just wonder if they had done a draw here of 2,500 and done another 4,000 CEC, if that would have taken it down back to the range of 510 or 512. And
Yeah.
so we'll obviously we won't know at this stage, because that's not something that they that they share, but it becomes a real problem for all the people who are running out of time. And so our hearts go out to all of you. Our genuine hearts go out to you. And when we look at this here, score distributions, this is as of February the 16th, and this last draw was February the 19th. So technically more people piled in before this draw happened. But generally speaking, when you look at this group, there is a large number that are within the 500 to 600 range. And now, we know that at least if we go off of this, and if they did a draw, because so much time has passed, we don't know how many more filed in here. But if 520 was was kind of the last range, was in that time frame, or at least that range of applicants, we know that there is a large portion of these that are still, they're still sitting in the 5 to 520. So we'll just have to watch it. We'll have to monitor it. But I'd encourage, as I always do, bring in Minister Miller here and say, Minister Miller, we have enough French, my friend. We have enough French. So do more CECs in Canada. Follow your actual annual levels plans. That would be great. And yeah, there you go. Okay, Alicia. Yes.
Yeah. And the problem on this is he probably is following the levels plan over the course of the year, but the timing is everything. And this is what we're talking about, right? Because of this timing, it is, there's winners and losers.
Yeah. I have to be really careful here because I don't want to get too political. So I'm going to leave it right where it's at and not even mention it. Okay. What was going through my mind right now? Okay. A couple other things that we want to point out, I guess. And this relates back to our Canadian Immigration podcast. And if you guys go to our website, you will see that we have blogs and resources. And then here we have our podcast, and you can listen to it on iTunes or Spotify, because I know a lot of you are commuting, you're driving to work now. The days of, working at home are kind of drifting away, although some of you are hybrid. We'd strongly encourage you to subscribe to the podcast, because when you subscribe, you will see that we have started a new series. Now, we released this one a while ago, 5 days ago, we released it, the Certificate of Qualifications. But we have renamed the series. So we have our Time's Up series. Make sure you watch those. But we have now started a new series called Express Entry Getting It Right. And we released the Certificate of Qualification points, which if you haven't watched that one or listened to it, definitely do, because it's an issue that lots of people fall into, a trap when they misinterpret how they can get their points. But Alicia and I just finished recording another Express Entry Getting It Right episode that will be released either today or tomorrow on police clearance certificates. So if you have not had a chance to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on our Spotify, make sure that you go ahead and do that. See if the Spotify opens up here. Oh, timed out. I'll have to sort that out because I don't have it downloaded. Okay, so check that out, and lots of resources available for you guys. Okay, as far as announcements, there really isn't anything. We don't have a draw today. There's been, Alicia, what do we have in terms of any other notices before we jump into getting questions answered?
There was a newsroom release, so instead of the notices, it's under news releases. It's for
Mhm.
Sudan, and so Canada's continuing to try to assist refugees, specifically
Oh,
from Sudan.
yes.
And so
Hmm.
there's resettlement as well
Yeah.
as they're opening up a few more spots for family reunification for
Mhm.
sponsorships for Sudanese. So that was published, um, but that's really the only thing that they've put out officially recently.
Okay. All right, let's jump into some of the questions this and comments. So this is Yasser. He says, "Good evening from Iraq again. Hey, I just covered an example where I had to get a police clearance certificate from a client in Iraq a number of years back. So that has forms a part of the Express Entry Getting It Right police clearance episode that we're going to be launching." He says, "Currently it's -4 getting the taste of Canada before hopefully having my PR application approved." Well, Yasser, we are fingers crossed for you, our friend, and hope that that does indeed happen for you quickly. Okay. Sanchita says, "Hey, Mark and Alicia, great work. Do you have any insight on whether the 50 points will be removed in spring for the LMI exempt work permits like ICT, Francophone mobility, etc.?" So,
Yeah.
Alicia, have you heard anything, any other news? We like, I don't know, like maybe there's some, uh, I don't know why the minister has not announced it. Someone's clearly lobbying him.
So,
Minister, what's going on, my friend? What's going
so
on?
Sanchita, this is the issue, is that we were hopeful when they first kind of made these announcements that maybe those 50 points would only pertain to LMIA-based job
LMIAs.
offers, because that's where the fraud was happening. We know, of course, that under the current system for arranged employment job offer points, you could get those 50 points if you have a closed employer-specific work permit. If it's an LMIA-based work permit, you could get those points right away as long as the employer also is going to continue to write a letter to say that they will intend to continue to employ you. But you could have also got those 50 arranged employment points from things like you mentioned, like Francophone mobility or intercompany transfers, where it is employer-specific. But in order to get those 50 points, you have to have already worked for that employer for a full year. So 52 weeks, 30 hours per week, plus have that closed work permit, plus the employer says that they will intend to continue to employ you. So we were hopeful that maybe they would keep the 50 points for those closed work permits that were not LMIA based, because there ought not to be fraud in those circumstances. But who knows? Because when they made an updated announcement, they said basically they were taking the points away and they didn't carve out any exemptions. So it remains to be seen because they haven't followed through. We don't know what exactly the final state of affairs will be, because so far people still have the 50 points in their profiles. They're still getting invitations to apply. So we're just kind of standing by and seeing what will happen when they actually finally drop the official announcement.
All right. Next one up on our list here is from Anand. It says, "Hey, Mark, what does review required mean in a PR application? Does it apply only to eligibility? What could be some causes behind this?" This is a super broad one.
Yeah, and so review required could mean a number of things. If you're taking a look at your portal and it says review required, or if you applied for your access to information and privacy request to get your GCMS notes. So something requires review by an officer, and it could just be like a general, okay, do they meet eligibility? It could be, well, let's take a look at your work history and experience and make sure that it's correct. Let's take a look at background security checks and clearances. But normally they now need to do some further due diligence on some aspect of your application.
All right. I wanted Here we go. I just wanted to pull up here. Irfan sent a super, and I was just trying to pull it up. Oh, here we go. Okay, I found it. We have, sometimes it takes a little bit for the super chats to pull up. So here is our friend's question. He said, "I am on TCT on 212 knock code in December 2024. I applied for knock code change. Okay. Can I claim 200 points in my express entry profile while the application is in process for knock code change?" So I'm assuming that it must be like, I don't know, TCT. Do you know what that stands for? Um,
Mm-mm.
if you're in one knock code, I'm assuming that you have an employer specific work permit or fund, and I'm assuming that you're somehow applying for a change in that work permit to a different knock. Well, at this stage, you can't claim if the LMIA has been approved, then there may be a possibility, but always I will ring that bell and say you should book a consult so that we can try to understand exactly what you're talking about here. When it comes to claiming job offer points, which Minister Miller has not removed yet, um, the 200 points are triggered in three ways. Well, kind of three ways. One, if your employer obtained a labor market impact assessment that we call a permanent LMIA, where it's only designed to add points for permanent residents, and your employer says they've got a job waiting for you for at least a year after you become a PR. So that permanent LMIA, if they applied and secure that LMIA, the moment the LMIA is approved, then you can use that to claim your points. The other is if you're on an LMIA-based work permit, okay, that was supported by an LMIA. And then the third option is if you'd been working for the company for at least a year on an employer-specific work permit, essentially within the International Mobility Program. That's where it's resounded. So those are the three factors. Now, in terms of on TCT, don't know what that is.
Maybe
But in your
ICT?
maybe ICT, I bet maybe it's a typo, and probably Irfan is correcting. There it is. Boom, ICT. So yes, so that's what it comes down to. So did they? If you're changing, so now I understand the context. So if Irfan, if your employer is changing your position, I've got other reservations with this, which is whether or not you can continue to maintain your intercompany transfer work permit if you're actually changing knock codes. Now, this is a whole different world, and this is why we recommend you book a consult. But the reality is, if it's an LMIA, and that's what was justifying this transition to a different knock code, then maybe. But I have found in the context of ICTs, there can be promotions and there can be slight modifications to what you're doing with the company. But to shift wholesale from one knock code to another, you have to be very, very careful that it doesn't disqualify you from the ICT in the first place. And I just bring that
And the,
up. So, Alicia,
and
your
the other
thoughts on this?
problem, Irfan, is that in order to claim the 200 points, you have to show you've been working for a year under that closed intercompany transfer under the managerial, the 00. And so, if you're just doing it now, like Mark said, there's potential problems about getting that ICT work permit, because the whole nature of the intercompany transfer is you have to have been working in a substantially similar position in the foreign company while you're coming to or for the year before you've come to the Canadian company. And so if you're literally changing from a senior manager to a senior manager or a CEO or something of this company, then that could be an issue in terms of not being able to get a new ICT. And the rules on the job offer points for ICTs under the International Mobility Program, they're not instant. And so this is where you have to prove that you've worked in that job for a year. So there's a number of moving parts that make this problematic.
All right, let's jump to this massive super chat from Redemption. Okay, let's see if we can tackle this one. I don't think we've had a super chat for $70 before. When I was on a study permit back in 2018, oh yes, Redemption, we see this all the time. Okay, let's dig into this. When I was on a study permit back in 2018, I did DoorDash for about 2 to 3 hours. Since it was such a short period of time, and I'm assuming you said, this DoorDash is not for me, maybe. I completely forgot to mention it in my postgrad work permit, TRV, and PR applications. Is it misrep? I'm already a PR. Can my PR be revoked? This almost sounds like another client that I know.
So, uh, and this is where we always, when we're working with clients, we always kind of, I take a look at their resume and then I start grilling them. Did you have part-time jobs? Did you have low-skilled jobs? Did you have jobs that you failed to mention on your previous applications? Because it is something where we want to make sure that there's no misrepresentation, that you haven't, failed to include something in a previous application. And if you did, we want to make sure to correct it by the time you're applying for PR. If you're already a PR, then the question would be, is the fact that you withheld the information on the part-time work
Material.
for a few hours a week, is it material? Is it something that could have caused an error in the administration of the act? And so would it have made a difference on your PGWP application? Like, was that unauthorized work while you were a student? Was it something that would have been material on your TRV applications? Um, were you engaged in unauthorized work while you were getting that DoorDash income? And in your PR application, was it something that would have made a difference in terms of your points or in terms of eligibility, or whether an officer would have made a different decision on your application? And hopefully this is like what lawyers call de minimis, right? It is something that is small. It is hopefully not something that would have caused you to be working without authorization, because that's another issue, because that goes into your statutory declarations. Um, and then it's up to an officer when they're looking at your PR card renewals and things to assess if there is a change. And so normally we would talk to you about doing a letter of explanation when you are doing your PR card renewal and say, hey, look, I didn't even realize I was supposed to be putting in my temporary work or my low skilled work. And I want to make sure to correct this and just say, this is what happened and here's why. And then you know that you've dealt with it and you haven't kind of brushed it under the rug.
All right, let's jump here to our next super. This one is, thank you, Simk. Simk says, hi, Mark. I submitted my PR application on February the 14th at 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. Okay. Alicia, do you want to just explain UCT time to everyone, and then we'll continue with the Simp question here? Because obviously, Simp, whenever someone says I, that's kind of a triangle, which basically means you need to slide over and book a consultation on our website, because anytime you're asking something that directly affects you, we are very, very loath to say, yes, you can do this, or no, you can do this, or provide exact legal advice, just because of we might be missing something. But UCT or UTC, Universal Time Code, can you explain that a little bit to the average viewer here?
Yeah, so immigration is super strict about this. They didn't actually have it properly put into the regulations when they first moved to online systems many, many years ago. And then since that time, there were circumstances where, well, Canada is a very big country. And so we have many time zones, and we actually have like a half-hour time zone if you look in the Maritimes. And so people were trying to figure out, well, what is my deadline, right? Especially when you have kids who are turning 18 or over the age of 22, depending on the age of dependency. Especially when you have deadlines to submit an application, what's the end of the deadline? And so immigration clearly said, all right, we're not using different time zones. We're not going to figure out which province you're in when you submit it. It is now universal coordinated time. So UTC is universal coordinated time, and they will look at this. And if you have not met your deadline, then they are going to refuse that application. So this coordinated universal time is your deadline for filing that application. So if you had an invitation to apply and you had to have done it before February 15th, then this is your deadline. So you can go onto, there's a number of time code matchup things on the internet. You can check to see, well, what was, 10:30 p.m. Did that actually meet the cutoff for universal coordinated time, February 15th or not? Um, but what will probably happen is you will get a AOR back to see what your AOR says. So in terms of what the date of the application was.
You bet. So I
And
just
Mark's
went
pulling it up here.
here. Yeah, sorry. I think you can hear me, Alicia, here. I was just going through this. Oh, come on, cooperate with me there. I just did a search to try to find, and this is within the various applications, they do hint at this. So this is the work permit after you apply, kind of what to expect. But they do have here a discussion of this. And when you click on this link right here, it actually takes you to the current time. So this would be 5:34:15. And in where I'm at, it's 10:34. So 7 hours, it looks like, is the difference from where I am and Alicia are to what the UTC time is. So that's a good way of of kind of identifying. All right. Universal time code. Now, Simp says, I submitted my PR application on the 14th of February on Valentine's Day at 10:30 p.m., which equated to, now he says like 12 a.m. UTC. I don't know exactly where he's at, where it was submitted, but it became February the 15th. I got the AOR, but will my application be rejected, or is it okay, or should I withdraw? Well, Simp, if you submitted it, and I don't know, we don't know the kind of application you submitted or what the context is, which is always the problem, always. And so we will never, ever tell you to withdraw anything. I encourage you to book a consult and we can actually look at this. But here's one reality. If you're able to submit, that's positive. If they've acknowledged it as being received, it's going to be a rare occasion that they then reject it after and say, well, no, we didn't receive it. Usually at that time, they will capture it and say, well, hey, this is a problem. But understand, Sim, we can't give you any direction because we don't know what the context is here. I don't know the type of application, other than acknowledging that an AOR is just that. It's acknowledging it as being received. And yeah, we don't know. Because
So
sometimes
on
oh, go ahead, Alicia. Yeah, go ahead.
on the AOR, it'll say which day the application was received. So
Mhm.
if it says that it was received on the 14th, that's going to be a good thing. So check your AOR.
And we also don't know what the deadline is. So
Mhm.
if it's an invitation to apply, well, the portal closes, so you can't actually submit. Um, so yeah, it's a tough, Simp. We try to get as much leverage and mileage we can out of this, but yeah, sometimes we just need more information. So recommend you book a consult. Okay, we've got one more little super chat here if I can find it. All right, yes, let's see if I can find this here. Okay. All right. RHS says, good evening, HIL team. Kindly highlight visitor record, exit, and reentry issues, particularly minors. Okay, you guys, I'm happy to highlight this for you. So this is an issue that many people are having to deal with. And I think it is something that our dear minister needs to look into because the consequences and results of this are quite perverse. So, Minister, I want you to listen to this. So I'm going to keep you handy with Alicia and I'm going to shrink you down and I'm going to stick you over here. But I want you to listen to this, Minister, because this is the problem. So the rules for people who have temporary documents issued in Canada, work permit and study permit, is that if you leave and your work permit is still valid and your study permit is still valid, so you have a visitor, you have a TRV in your passport, you've got an entry visa in your passport, or you come from a visa exempt country and you have an ETA, you lawfully depart the country to go see family or Christmas holidays or whatever it might be, and then you re-enter. The expiry date on those study permit documents and work permit documents continues to remain the expiry date. So you can continue to work, study on that work permit based on that expiry date. A visitor record is different. I think the distinction is very arbitrary and idiotic, but IRCC has taken the policy that any visitor who is issued a visitor record, that expiry date on the visitor record is valid and the person can stay in Canada validly until the expiry, or they would need to extend before that expiry date. But if they were issued a visitor record that is valid for 1 year from this date today, and I leave tomorrow for a week, and then I come back to the port of entry, re-entering Canada, IRCC then says, well, it's up to CBSA to determine your status as a visitor, the duration on entry. So no longer is your visitor record still valid. So that expiry date, which technically would still be, 1 week less than a year from now, or the expiry date is no longer the real expiry date on that reentry as a visitor. And IRCC says it's up to CBSA. So if CBSA did nothing but just admitted you, then the way IRCC is interpreting it is that entry day, you then have 6 months from that day of validity as a visitor. And so you can see how this problem becomes a nightmare for people. I think Stephen Murin's talked about this in a podcast, I think at the beginning of January him and Deanna did. But the reality is individuals in that situation, rarely is it the principal applicant or their spouse that's caught. It's almost always the kids. And so if you have a visitor application in the queue for a child, and it's accompanying or it's together with the work permit or study permit extension, what happens is you may have submitted it more than 3 months or really beyond the new validity of that visitor stay if you left and came back in. So once again, the date that you come back in, if an officer doesn't otherwise list a specific expiry date for the child status, then it's 6 months. So if you wait a year after that to then apply to extend your study permit, work permit, and the visitor records for your kids, those visitor records for the kids, that's not the real expiry date. It was the last entry plus 6 months if the officers did nothing. So you'd be in a situation where you're beyond the restoration period, and it's not an extension because the kids are out of status. And this is what we're seeing. So the reentry, particularly for minors, I think it's just wrong, Minister. I think this is on all circumstances. You've got a 2-year-old child and you're saying now your visitor status is expired. In the past, when this happened, everyone, I would very politely call up the port of entry and say, hey, here's the situation. This is kind of a perverse result, but this little child is now out of status and can't be restored. Can we come down and do a flagpole? Well, you guys, as we know now, that has been removed. And so how we deal with this issue becomes very complex. In other words, you pretty much need to leave the country, fly back to your home country. If there's no TRV in your passport, and understand these options are not something I would recommend for anyone. I'm just throwing out possibilities here. Each individual needs to book a consult and we need to talk about their unique situation. But they would need to leave. If they had, per se, a valid TRV, it would be fantastic. You leave, then reenter and seek. You talk to the border officers and say, here's the situation. And hopefully they would facilitate and then issue a new visitor record for that child. But if an individual doesn't have a valid TRV, then you would actually need to leave and then apply for new TRVs outside of Canada. The good Lord knows the complications that would cause if people are in school or work. That's option one. Option two is you attempt to restore, if you could even call it that, the status of the child through the use of a temporary resident permit to overcome the fact that they're out of status. But the reality is, for everyone, like, it's very case specific, and there may be another alternative or another possibility that Alicia and I would come up with based on really understanding your situation. But it's horrible. And so, Minister, the distinction is idiotic, and I don't think there should be any rational basis for not accepting the validity on the original visitor record, so that people understand that they can have certainty in their lives, especially when the border officers don't have time to stamp passports or are loath to issue visitor records or anything at the POEs these days.
And the other risk is that if you have the situation and your child is now inadmissible because they're an overstay, that makes the parents inadmissible too. So everybody's inadmissible and they can't, like, it's just horrendous if you've spent, you've done your studies, you've got your PGWP, you're finally qualified to do your express entry application. And in the meantime, you took a trip with your kids and your family and you didn't realize that that reset the clock on the visitor record. The kid only now has 6 months from their last date of entry, and it makes the entire family inadmissible for PR because of an inadmissible child. Like, it's insane. And nobody knows, right? Nobody would know that because they think they have a visitor record. The other thing that really gets my goat is that I often have clients who are coming on a corporate file where the parents have applied for a work permit. They're issued that work permit under an LMIA or an ICT, and they have kids. And I always say, get the study permit. And the officer says, oh, no, I'm going to save you some money.
Yeah.
And we're just going to have the kid enter on a visitor record. And then we have this problem.
Yes. So the takeaway is, when you're coming to Canada with your child that will be of school age or otherwise, even the hard part, Alicia, is when they're like 2 years old, which is the situation with one of my clients just recently. We're still trying to figure this out. It's not as easy to get a study permit because they're not actually going to be attending school at that age. But for any school age child, even if you are eligible for your child to study on a visitor's record, essentially in Canada, we 100% encourage you to get the study permit for them and not rely on the visitor record. For years, I would do that exact thing. I would say, look, you don't need to waste money. You can just get the visitor record at the port of entry and it authorizes the child to study. No more. So, Minister Fraser, this is our appeal to you to please look at this provision because it is perverse and it creates results that could never have been contemplated by immigration. Not only does it waste everybody's time, including your officer's time, to force families to have to apply over and over again to extend stay when a child's status was only extended for 6 months when the rest of the family was still have 2 years of validity on their work permit and study permit. Not only does it eliminate that, but these people, how are they supposed to know anything about this provision? Because they look at their documents, they monitor them, they track the expiry, and the border officers sure as heck don't say anything to them when they allow them back in. They only realize when your jerk officers choose to refuse a 2-year-old child's visitor extension because they're now out of status, even though the current visitor record that they were previously issued, the expiry date was well within the time for which they applied for the extension. So I understand that officers are just following what their instructions are, but in your effort to get people out of the country, this is not one you want to do. Okay, it's just not. All right, there we go. Boy, it's sure fun to criticize Minister Miller. It's easy to do that in hindsight, and you know what? I don't have to make the tough calls, but I'm sure there's a rationale for everything. But that one, Minister, I'm gonna appeal to your good nature and please deal with it because it's creating perverse results. At least advise. I'm going to bring you back. At least advise your officers not to be jerks and to refuse in these circumstances. There has to be either a change internally or something to advise the family that, hey, submit this extra documentation for a TRP so that I can overcome this. You need to put something into place because this is just, it's not cool. Not cool. And you guys need more cool things, okay? If you want to increase your chances of getting more votes, then do something kind to people instead of what's happening now. Okay. Alicia just squirms when I do that. All right. Let's keep trucking here along. Oh, trucking. Boy, that's another hot button topic. Okay. Okay. I think we've got another super here. Let's pull this one up from Moy. Moy says, is it okay to keep on working as a student? You get your transcript for applying for postgrad work permit. Also, is there a grace period if the work is part-time? Okay, let's try this again. Is it okay to keep on working as a student when you get your transcript for applying for postgrad? What they're referring to is the confirmation of, well, it's not the confirmation. It's just you've got your transcript. They're not saying that the program is complete. Maybe that's what they're saying, Alicia. But let's jump back and I'll pull up your blog post and we'll direct everyone back to it. But can you talk about this also, Minister Miller? This is also a real stupid policy that just causes all kinds of perverse results for students. And it doesn't need to be this complicated. This is something I hope in the new development of the new Immigration Act, Alicia, that they get rid of this stupid stuff, both of these, because it just creates goofy policy. So, okay, I'll turn it over to you here.
All right. So I wrote a blog post about this, and it's all about, can students keep working after the end of their studies? And so Mark's going to pull it up and we'll go through it. But basically, there's a trigger effect. So immigration says, you can work, certain students can work under the terms of their study permit on or off campus, depending on how that study permit was issued. Make sure to go and check the IRCC pages on who can work on and off campus and whether your type of study permit allows you to work at all. But assuming that you were working under the authority of part-time work, so it used to be less than 20 hours. They, in certain circumstances, have changed it to 24 hours during the school term. However, as soon as you get the transcripts, a letter of completion, it can be an email from your school, or your degree, the degree is normally the last thing that comes, you have to stop working. So if you get that official letter, you get the transcripts, or you get some sort of proof that you've completed your program of studies, that day, you literally have to start working. You can't work at all until the day that you submit your full PGWP application. And so a lot of students don't realize this, and then they're working without authorization. And the risk on this is that when you apply for your PGWP, you have to say whether you worked without authorization or not. It's one of the statutory declaration questions. And if you lie, they can say it's misrepresentation. The other problem is if you've been working without authorization, technically an immigration officer is not allowed to give you a work permit until it has been 6 months after the unauthorized work. So the consequences are horrendous. And so be super, super careful. As soon as you get that transcript, you stop working entirely, zero work. You don't get any pay from your employer. You just say, I have to stop working. And the employer needs to respect that, because it's also an offense for the employer to pay you or to have you as an employee, well, to pay you as an employee or to have you work after the date that you have received your transcript up until the date you submit your PGWP. If you submit your PGWP and it's a complete application, then great. Now all of a sudden you can work full time, and then you can start counting, if it's high skilled work experience, you can start counting that work towards your high skilled Canadian work for express entry. So make sure to stop working as soon as one of those trigger events happen.
Indeed. I put the link in the chat, you guys, on the YouTube channel. Those who are watching elsewhere, it's pretty simple. When you are looking for any of the blog posts that Alicia and I are talking about, all you have to do is go to our website, go to blog and resources, select blog, and then in the search window, just type in whatever term you think might capture our discussion. So in this case, when we just type in students, there's a lot of different blog posts on this topic, but eventually we get to this one: can students be working after the end of studies? Okay, and I also want to point out on our YouTube channel here that we have the ability as well. If I go back here and just go to our main channel, you also have the ability to search. So you can go through here and look for anything, type in students, type in whatever, and you will see all of the various topics that relate specifically to international students. So it's hard to believe, Alicia, we're at 969 videos and counting. That's a channel, right? There's some content there. Okay, let's jump back and let's try to tackle a few more questions here that have been asked by our faithful viewers. And thanks for your patience, everyone. Okay, we're going to pull up Joy Star here. I'm fully invested in stocks, and I want to cash out the required amount after ITA. Will this be a problem since I did not hold the cash for 6 months in my bank account, but had it as stocks instead? Sounds like a good next topic for our Express Entry Getting It Right series. Money, 6 months. People ask this question all the time, and maybe I'll tackle this one, Alicia. So the reality is, Joey Star here, when it comes to funds, no one actually needs to have all of their funds, the minimum settlement amount, in their bank account for the full 6 months. That's not the requirement. In the instructions, it specifically asks that individuals provide a letter from their bank with the average balance over the past 6 months. Why? Because they want to know that these funds are actually yours, that they're not, a loan that you got and then just dumped into your account. They want to see that there's a gradual increase in funds that's commensurate with saving from the employment income you're earning. Now, at times, like you, Joy Star, you may have investments. Those investments alone, you can't just provide the investment, the stock certificate to show that those funds are there. IRCC has said that they don't like those. They want to see that the cash is available and readily used, ready to be used for settlement in Canada. So in your situation, you're just going to track where those funds came from when you cash out your stocks that you've invested, at least enough to cover the minimum settlement funds. You want to track it. You want to provide evidence to show where those funds came from, the account that they came from, if there's a transfer or a wiring instructions or an online transfer record of it. You want to track it just to show that it's yours. So there shouldn't be a problem with that. It doesn't have to be in your account for 6 months before you apply, but you need to demonstrate where it came from and that it's not a loan, that it is truly yours. And when you do that, I see no issues with people doing this. Alicia, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on this topic. It comes up a lot in the context of proof of funds.
Mm-hmm. And So just to recap as well, proof of funds only need to be demonstrated if you're actually doing a federal skilled worker or if you are not invited under CEC. So, if you were invited under CEC, then you can, whatever you've put as how much funds available for my stay, that has to be honest and accurate. Normally, the system is always going to populate that proof of funds area as soon as you put anything other than 0 in your thing, in your EAPR online sections. But make sure that you know that if you are invited under CEC, technically you don't have to provide proof of funds. If you were invited under a different category, then yes, federal skilled worker or sometimes PNPs, it gets a little bit complicated on whether you do have to provide proof of funds. And it's important to make sure that you're meeting PNP requirements for financial sufficiency as well as the federal requirements.
You bet. And I'll also want to just share with everyone the Canadian Immigration Institute. This is our kind of delivery arm of our courses, our online courses. And right now, the Express Entry Accelerator and Masterclass, I have a masterclass this evening. Every 2 weeks, I have it. In this course, and if I just go here and go to my member login, and then I scroll down here, I've got so many different versions. I think this is it here. And it's going to get a new one as soon as they institute, as soon as this fine fellow here institutes the job offer restrictions and removes that, then I'm going to need to update this. But I want to show you here, there's over 70 lessons, but in module 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yes, there's a lot of videos in here. In module 6, we have a section that specifically addresses every document that you would need. I need to show more because there's a ton. And if I go down here, then I have to advance to page 2, you will see here that we have a section on proof of funds. And sometimes people, I had a consult just the other day, actually it was yesterday, sometimes people do not have the settlement funds and they're outside of Canada and they're wondering, what do I do? Well, there are mechanisms in place to get assistance with it, but you have to do it right. I explain that in this lesson. This one alone is 11 minutes, this lesson, but then I have different samples here. What if I don't have the funds? Excuse me. And then I also have sample documents called gift deeds, where a family member, like a parent, a mother or father, gifts the settlement funds to a child who is then intending to land in Canada. And this has to be done properly if you want it to work. These templates are there as a guide for you, and I provide a lot of different explanation in here on how that works, including the factors that they look at, the essentials for elements of gift deeds. It's all in here as well as the video for those who subscribe to the course. But the key with all of this, and I tell people this all the time, if you're trying to convince immigration that those funds are not a loan, but they're actually a gift and they're yours, an irrevocable gift given from a family member, love and affection, for example, right, for settlement in Canada, then you have the onus of establishing to the officer that that's the case. And it is a high burden. If you do it properly, it can work. If you don't, it will result in refusal of your application. And the whole reason Alicia and I created that new series, which I showed earlier for those of you who've just jumped onto the call here, our live stream, the reason, if we go back here, you can go back to the podcast here. The reason we created this brand new Express Entry Getting It Right series, this latest episode that we dropped 5 days ago, we have another one that's coming on police clearance certificates just in the next couple of days, is because, you guys, we are now in a world within immigration where you do not get second chances. And largely that is because you have no ability, for the majority of you, to extend your work permits. With the rules that IRCC has put in place, they're not doing 18-month post-grad magical grants of work permits anymore. Those days are long gone. Minister Miller has not done that. His predecessors did, but that ain't coming back. They literally want 1 to 2 million people to be gone in the next couple of years. And the restrictions on the temporary foreign worker program as to who can apply for LMIAs also limits a ton of you. So if you get an ITA, you've got to get this right. Obviously, Alicia and I have many, many clients that we work with every day, helping them to make sure their express entry applications are correct. We work with you. We help you to file your applications. And we love the way we do it. Encourage you to slide over and check out all about us and how we work with our clients. But we do more than just live streams. We do more than just immigration consultations, but we literally help you to file your applications right the first time. We also want to point out that the DIY course, the Express Entry course, is there for those who say, "Oh, Mark, like we are down to our last penny. I have no ability to pay your legal fees or whatever it is, or to hire any representative." That's why we created the course. So I encourage those of you who are in the process of going through Express Entry that you don't take it lightly, that you understand and acknowledge that the slightest mistake can cause an application to get returned. And I'll share, Alicia, with our listeners and our viewers, I'll share one right today. I just finished resubmitting a spousal sponsorship that we had filed for a client, fortunately, only a little over a week ago. But we neglected to include birth certificates, which are not always required, but we neglected to include birth certificates for 2 minor dependent children that are not accompanying. In fact, the sponsored person doesn't even have passports for them. And we got the application returned because we did not include birth certificates. Fortunately, he was able to dig up a couple, and we were able to quickly resubmit the application this morning. But my goodness, when it comes to Express Entry, if your application gets returned, then you need a new ITA. And there is no guarantee that the government's going to do another 6,500 round of invitations for French language people that qualify. So please, whatever you do, please be careful. And we're here to help. And the reason Alicia and I do this is so that you'll say, hey, those guys seem to know what they're talking about. I'm going to hire them to help me with my application. So that's the whole purpose, besides the fact we don't do free consultations. And this is our way to give back to thousands and thousands of people that watch these live and as recordings. Oh, Chaitanya, this crazy guy. Welcome back, my friend, past client here. He says, hey, Mark and Alicia, hope you guys are doing well. Would I need PCC again for citizenship? Thanks. Okay. All right. PCC for citizenship. Let's slide over here, Chaitanya, and let's take a look at the document checklist. We'll just expand it. I think I have to just look at it this way. If you go down here and you look at police clearance certificates, you'll see, submit the following if any of the following applies to you. So let's read it together. And I believe, Alicia, that this is the most common. I think this is the most current one. It says March 2024. I think this is it. I just pulled it off the government website. So original police certificates, you must provide a police certificate for each country or territory where you've been present for 183 days or more, i.e. 6 months, since the age of 18 for the 4 years immediately preceding the date of your application. Okay. If you are unable to obtain a police certificate, provide an explanation, consult how to get it. So I think what Chaitanya is getting at, he's probably been in Canada the whole time. So in these circumstances, Chaitanya, I just get it. I get the Canadian one, even though the IRCC instructions relate more to permanent residence and say you don't need it. In the context of a Canadian citizenship application, I just get it and include it. I just do. So I don't know, Alicia, if you have a different view on that. Obviously, if we click on how to get the police certificate, it takes us here. And then if Chaitanya, you've only been in Canada the last 4 years and you haven't gone back, if we go here to the instructions and we follow it through, I can see why you're asking the question because it is confusing. Criminal record check is what it is. And you go to the RCMP to get it. Special considerations, fingerprints, not available outside of Canada, contact an accredited company, paper. If you need to submit fingerprints, they must be collected inside. You can see there is nothing here other than if you need to give fingerprints, this isn't the same as giving your biometrics, and you don't need to provide when you apply for permanent residence. We'll tell you if you need a criminal record check while your application is being processed. That's just related to permanent residence. So when all else fails, if there's any doubt, Alicia, I always tell people to just go ahead and get it. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, let's see what we have, if we've got some other ones here that we can pull up. Wow, time flies when you're having fun. Hey, Alicia. Okay, this one's from Hosh. Nice cat in the suit. Man, look at that handsome tabby. Would a 2 weeks unpaid vacation break the FSW continuous job requirement? This
Yeah,
is
and I
unpaid, Alicia. Unpaid is the kicker. And I'll just point out that if it's a paid vacation, I have no problems at all and do not consider it a break.
yeah,
What do you
yeah,
say, Alicia, to that one?
yeah. And this is where I think Mark is with me in terms of erring on the side of being conservative if there is a doubt, that you always try to make sure that you meet the requirement no matter what. Because as soon as you're not meeting the strict requirement, then officers have discretion and they can say, you know what, I don't think that qualifies, and they can refuse an application. So, if at all possible, if you are looking at your 1 year continuous, full time, outside of Canada, high skilled work experience, make it continuous, make sure that it's the full 52 weeks. You can take you know make sure that you can tack on time, so you can go through that period and then tack on the extra 2 weeks, and then hopefully you're within your 1 year. um, there is discretion sometimes for officers to take a look. For sure, if it's paid, I wouldn't be as worried, but the fact that you said that it is unpaid could lead an officer to say they're not meeting minimum eligibility.
All right, let's shift over here to, we're going to go to Yassine's question. He says, from Quebec, just a simple one. Can we exit Canada for a trip while waiting for the study permit extension? Everything's still valid for the moment. Visa, study permit, passport. This one I'm going to ring the bell, Yasin, because when you use can we exit, that's as much can I exit. And Alicia and I, like I said, we don't ever want to give that kind of information directly about some action that you need to take that could have fairly serious consequences. Now, generally speaking, Alicia, can you address this situation in the context of someone who has a study permit that's valid? So he said for the moment, the visa and the study permit is valid. So if you leave and re-enter with a study permit that's valid while you have an extension in the queue, or if you leave and re-enter with a study permit that is now expired and you have an extension application in the queue, how would you treat those differently when you're advising your clients?
So it's always, that you always add a little bit of risk, because every time you come back to the border, you don't know what that officer is going to say. You're not sure if that officer is going to start looking through your background, start digging into your applications, and somehow say that you did unauthorized study or work or something is wrong in your application. So there's always some element of risk. If you have a valid study permit and that study permit is valid for another few months, even though you've submitted that study permit extension, then you're in a more secure situation than if you actually had a study permit that expired and you are leaving the country and trying to re-enter while you have an ongoing extension application in. So that becomes way more risky. So, usually it's a little bit less risky if you already have a valid study permit. I would want to talk to you about why you're doing that study permit extension. Is there a change in program? Are you not completing the program within the normal time or the time that was set out in your initial study permit? Are you extending the study permit because your passport had expired in the past and now you have a new passport? Sometimes people don't realize that if the passport has expired and they have a new passport, they need to get a new ETA. Sometimes, if you're from a visa required country, you need to make sure your visa is still valid in that original passport, and hopefully you can bring both, prove that you have both. So there are a number of moving parts. Um, I would say make sure to book a consult if you're concerned about this, because sometimes people can get tripped up if there's something that they're not realizing could be an issue.
All right, we'll just pull up here. Chaitanya's follow-up comment. He says, Chaitanya, what a good guy. He says, thanks, Mark. Waiting on the T4, then I'm booking an appointment. Timeline since PR, 2 weeks in India, 1 week in Mexico, 6 in total. Great. You're fine, my friend. I'm excited to help you with that application. So citizenship, that's exciting. And you had one heck of a go around, didn't you, Chaitanya? Like we had a tough go around with your PR, and then you had that massive delay waiting for your eCoper. And but everything's going according to plan. It's hard to believe so much time has passed already, my friend. All right, Chaitanya, thanks so much. Okay, let's see what else. Here's one for you, Alicia. How early can we renew our PR card?
Once you've met your residency obligation. So that is the answer. And make sure that you're not renewing it too early. So keep in mind that whatever date is on your signed COPR or eCOPR, so depending on whether you landed in person or you landed with an electronic confirmation of permanent residency, then that is the trigger date. That is what starts the clock running on your years of Canadian permanent residency. And so make sure that within that 5-year period that you can show that you have at least 2 years of residence in Canada, physical presence in Canada. And that's when you can then apply for your PR card renewal.
Yeah. And it is very good. Like, it's wise to do it in advance. It's always wise to pay attention to the current processing times, and they're really quite fast right now. This was last updated yesterday, 15 days processing. And I also want to point out, like, usually we have people asking a lot of questions about processing times and when my application will be approved and things like that. But if you look at some of these applications, ones for individuals that are, well, let's go to the family sponsorship here. You'll see that immigration is really strapped with resources now. They are in the process of laying off or terminating thousands of temporary officer positions. They've been given instructions to cut their budgets, and so it's having an impact on processing. So they're having to reassign officers to areas where they feel are priority, and PR card extensions they've deemed to be obviously a priority. That's why there's 15 days processing. But when it comes to permanent resident applications, they have to pick a winner and a loser. And when they look at spousal sponsorship and they look at the fact that some spouses may be separated waiting for PR, processing times for a spouse who's living outside of Canada is currently sitting at 10 months. This was updated at the beginning of the month. However, if we look at spouses who are inside Canada, same thing outside Quebec, look at this processing time, massive, 28 months. So they're trying to figure out, okay, well, this couple's together here in Canada. So it's not as big of a hardship for them to stay. And Alicia, I'm practically speaking, I'm seeing them look at these applications very quickly. And we have, I submitted one, I think we talked about this on the program already in a previous episode. They had submitted their application. I think it took almost a month, maybe a little bit less than a month to get the acknowledgement of receipt that then allowed them to file the open work permit application for the spouse. And if we then shift here and just take a quick look at the overall work permits from inside Canada, initial and extensions, these were at 150 some days, I think, at one starting to come down. But once again, they feel that if you're applying from within Canada, you're already working, you're benefiting from maintained status, so it's not a big deal if the processing times are taking a little bit longer. So that's why things are kind of different processing times for different applications. Just think of it as an issue of finite resources. They only have so many officers to process applications. Okay, here's a good one, and maybe we could even finish with this. I can't remember if there's any others, but PGSL says, will IRCC use the information submitted in previous express entry profiles that were ineligible or expired? There's a difference between ineligible and expired. So do you want to tackle this one, Alicia?
Mm-hmm. So ineligible applications. So sometimes people are just kind of playing around with their express entry profiles and they mistakenly, like they go through, they complete everything, and then for some reason they're not meeting minimum eligibility for CEC or FSW. And at the end, when they click submit, it says your profile's ineligible. So if it's an ineligible profile, there's probably a little bit less risk or concern that IRCC is going to cross-reference that with a profile that you've put into the pool. And to be safe, you can just do your LOE and say, look, I was messing around. I submitted an ineligible profile. I realized my mistake, and then I corrected it in the current application. An application where you've actually submitted that express entry and it was been refused, or is found to not meet program requirements is a little bit more serious, because now you have to say, all right, there's a reason that it was refused. If it's just been expired, like if you had a profile that was sitting in the pool and it just expires after a year, technically, yeah, immigration could go back and take a look at that, the information, the work experience, the NOC codes that you put into that application. And Mark and I always say, let's not leave it to chance. Let's not leave things to officers' discretion. Let's explain. And so if we take a look at somebody's current application and we ask them about their previous applications, expired express entry profiles, and there was something really different, right? You characterized your primary occupation as something different, or you have the same period of work experience, but you totally changed your knocks. Explain to the officer now about why you're doing that, because it is something that they do have in their database. They could look at it if they're concerned about misrepresentation. So it's there, it exists, it's a digital record. Hopefully you can explain it so that going forward, immigration is not going to have worries about misrepresentation.
All right. I know our time is very quickly passing here. Okay. Let's hit just one last one. And actually, well, this is from Spider Man, which I love the intel. So, with the current climate, some consultants suggest once PR application is submitted, all temp intent goes out of the window. And TRV is highly likely to be denied entry and canceled when re enter Canada at the border. Alicia, can you respond to this? This is like there's always some elements of possibility within these responses, but blanket theories on this, it's just lazy representation. um,
Yeah.
can you respond to that one?
Sure. And so, Spider-Man, one of the things, like just like I was saying in the past with people leaving on a study permit or being in status where you're asking for an extension, any time that you are leaving, there is theoretically a risk that an officer you can say something, they can get upset and start looking through your file and trying to pin something on you, because every entry is a new entry and it's a new examination and you have an obligation to tell the truth. However, as a general policy matter, you can go to the dual intent provisions. You can look up Section 22, dual intent in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And in general, you can look at the policy guidance, but officers need to consider the evidence that you put forward of dual intent. And so if you say, look, yes, I submitted a permanent residence application, either under express entry or a family spousal or whatever, if you've submitted a permanent residence application, for sure you have a permanent intent, but you can still also have a temporary intent. You can have both intents coexisting. It is a problem where your permanent intent totally takes over your temporary intent. And if you say to an officer, there is no way I'm ever leaving Canada, I'm going to stay here forever, but you only have a work permit or a study permit or a visa, then those are temporary applications. And that officer is going to refuse your application because you've just told them you don't have a temporary intent anymore. So you do need to maintain that temporary intent. You need to prove what are your connections to your home country? How are you supporting yourself in Canada? How do you maintain the ability to go home if and when required? Have you shown a history of compliance with immigration requirements, laws, and rules in Canada and in other countries? So, did you comply with leaving when you had to? And as long as they believe that you will leave if and when you had to, even if you filed your PR application, and you can show you have a dual intent, then that is something where they should allow you to still be here, um, as long as you still have that temporary intent.
All right, I'm going to hit just a quick last one. We'll jump on Prashant. He says, need to book a consult with you guys for spousal sponsorship. Just filed one this morning with 2 previous study visa refusals a couple of years back. Who do I book it with? Is there any hope in such cases? Yeah, there is. Of course, Prashant, there's hope in this case. You can book a consult very simply by going to our website. There's a link in the description below. There always is, no matter what platform you're watching on. But if you go over to our website here, all you have to do is click on Speak to a Lawyer, and then you can go through here. You can connect with which lawyer you want to connect with, and there are, like, if literally, I think I've got spots. I wonder if you even have any spots today. Let's see, tomorrow. So I've got openings tomorrow and Friday. Friday's wide open, so there are spots. I think I must be full then today. I looked this morning and I wasn't. Well, that's immigration. Okay. So Prashant, that's how you do it. So link in the description below and you can book it right away, even while we're still talking here. It's all automated. I want to give a shout out to Andy in Ottawa. Great to see you. Chaitanya says, yes, it did. And we're talking about the difficulty of his application. And he says, time to get back to the community soon. I'll be a business owner. That is really cool. Awesome, Chaitanya. Way to go. Okay. And then this one, SK Sam, I'm going to ring the bell. You really need to book a consult. So he said, my LMIA-based work permit was refused due to not having a positive LMIA, as it is still in ESDC. Yesterday, ESDC scheduled, I think, an interview with the employer next week. Visitor record expires by March. So this is a situation we're seeing all the time when it's taking 9-10 months for an LMIA to be approved. We used to be able to file work permits concurrently, and then people would benefit from maintained status, continue working. IRCC, generally speaking, would hold the processing of the work permit because they could see the LMIA. They were just waiting for it to be adjudicated. But now they don't. They just refuse, just like you've experienced. So common.
I think
Yeah.
they say 60 or 90 days. They'll only hold it for 60 or 90 days. And of
Yep.
course, ESDC is taking so much longer than that most
Yep.
people are getting refused.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, we'll follow up with the redemption with the super massive super chat. Says, following up on my question about forgetting to mention DoorDash experience, I didn't engage in unauthorized work and followed the 20 hours limit that was in place during that time. That's great. And yeah, at the end of the day, you're just going to follow the instructions that Alicia gave, and you don't want to be, perceived to be misrepresenting anything. And one other thing I'll add, I have a lot of consultations with people that are coming for a second opinion. So another representative had, a consultant usually had told them that, if you'd mentioned something previously, then it needs to be consistent. So don't correct it, just keep it the same. And guys, that's bad advice. Okay. So the key is on any application, I don't care what you've done in the past. I could care less. At the end of the day, our clients disclose everything. And when we do that, we then put ourselves in a position where we're proactive, where if there is discretion on the part of that officer to show mercy, they're far more likely to do that than if they go back through your history and remember their AI absolutely is scrubbing the heck out of their previous applications, matching, looking for inconsistencies, and they're throwing the book at people. So if you're proactive and say, hey, I am so sorry, I overlooked this, I didn't put this properly in my study permit, and then it carried forward to my postgrad. Now that I'm doing my PR, I know that this is an issue. Okay. Well, then by disclosing it, you're alerting the officer to it, and you're alerting the officer to the fact that you're an honest person. And then if there is discretion to be had, I found officers are far more willing. As a former officer, I was far more willing to work with someone who explained the problem and was trying to fix it versus trying to hide it. All right. So there we go, Alicia. This was a pretty good live Q&A today. I want to thank everybody for participating. Great questions, just fantastic topics. And just a reminder, once again, our new express entry, and I'll just hide it right here, our new express entry, Getting It Right series is dropping. So the first episode has dropped just 5 days ago on certificates of qualification. We just recorded today, Alicia and I, one on police clearance certificates, and you can watch it on iTunes. You can watch it on Spotify and subscribe there. Remember, if you are struggling and you need assistance, and obviously we can't give legal advice here, go to our website, book a consult, and any three of us would be delighted to help you and work with you. Those of you who need assistance with your overall applications, remember, we help with everything. So the only thing that we don't do is refugee matters. And well, I don't do caregiver applications either. And I'm sure there are some other nuanced exceptions, but generally speaking, yes, we can help you and you can hire us. And description, our legal fees. When you click on About Us, you can learn about our approach. And we strongly encourage you to take a look at our direct lawyer to client collaboration, which is, I think, is the best way of representing. And I'll hold it out against anyone else. Is it the most profitable, Alicia? No, it's not, because we don't have 5 assistants or paralegals or consultants underneath us. You work directly with Alicia, Igor, and myself when you're getting help with your application. So check that out. And of course, on our website, we have other resources, the blog, like we mentioned before. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which we are going to get back on track. And remember the podcast and, of course, our YouTube channel, where many of you are watching right now. If you haven't subscribed, please do it. And we will be posting a lot of videos, a lot more focused, targeted topics. And we always welcome your suggestions. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Take care.